I was ready to leave the city behind, convinced nothing was holding me there anymore. Years of quiet routines and unspoken moments had taught me how to walk away without looking back. But one sentence, spoken at the very last moment, stopped everything and forced me to question what I had been blind to all along. What happened next changed not just my plans, but my entire life. My name is Rose. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a doctor. I live alone in a quiet apartment building not far from the hospital where I've been working for the past 7 years. My days are usually predictable: early mornings, long shifts, short nights, and a routine that leaves little space for anything else. I chose this life consciously. Stability felt safer than emotions. May lives next door to me. She's 30. I don't know every detail of her work, only that she works from home and spends most of her time inside. We've been neighbors for almost 3 years. Not friends, not strangers, just two people whose lives run parallel, close but never crossing. We say hello in the hallway. Sometimes we talk about small things: the weather, a broken elevator, a package left at the wrong door. Once, I helped her carry groceries when the bags tore in the parking lot. Another time, she watered my plants while I was on a night shift stretch at the hospital. Simple things, normal things. I never thought much about her beyond that. She was kind, quiet, observant. She had a calm presence that made the building feel less empty. But I didn't label it as anything important. I didn't allow myself to. My life was built around work. I told myself I didn't have time for attachments. I'd seen enough fragile moments at the hospital to know how easily things fall apart. Keeping distance felt like control. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear her door close softly or her footsteps on the stairs. Sometimes she'd hear mine when I left before sunrise. That was the extent of our shared life. 2 doors, 1 wall between us. On weekends, I usually caught up on sleep or paperwork. May spent her Saturdays on the balcony with her laptop or a book. We nodded to each other from a distance, exchanged polite smiles, and went back to our own worlds. There was nothing dramatic between us. No tension, no obvious signs. That's why it felt so normal. Safe. I remember one evening clearly. I came home exhausted after a double shift. I dropped my keys near my door and crouched to pick them up. May opened her door at the same time. She asked if everything was okay. I said yes, just tired. She nodded, hesitated for a second like she wanted to say something else, then wished me a good night. That moment stayed with me longer than it should have. Not because of what she said, but because of what she didn't. Still, I moved on. I always did. Over time, our building became a place I slept in, not lived in. I started thinking about change. A new hospital had contacted me months earlier. Better conditions, fewer night shifts, another city. I kept delaying the decision, but deep down, I knew I would leave. I didn't tell anyone. There was no one to tell. Until one afternoon, I received the final confirmation email. The contract was ready. All that was left was packing. I started with small things: books, clothes, kitchen items, boxes stacked quietly in my living room. I worked slowly, methodically, like everything else in my life. The next evening, as I carried a box into the hallway, I heard a door open. May stood there, surprised, looking at the boxes. She asked if I was moving. I said yes. I told her I'd accepted a job in another city, that I'd be leaving soon. I tried to sound casual, neutral. She smiled, congratulated me, said it sounded like a good opportunity. Her voice didn't change. Her expression didn't either. If there was anything behind it, I didn't see it. We stood there for a few seconds longer than usual. Then she said she hoped the move would bring me everything I was looking for. I thanked her. She went back inside. I carried the box in and closed my door. That should have been the end of it. But that night, the apartment felt different. Quieter than usual. Like something had already left before I had. I ignored the feeling. I always did. The next day, I packed more boxes. The hallway smelled faintly of cardboard and tape. My life, reduced to things that fit into squares. I was about to leave the city. At that moment, I still believed I was leaving alone. After our short conversation in the hallway, I tried to return to my routine. I told myself nothing had changed. I went to work, did my shifts, spoke to patients, signed charts, followed procedures. On the surface, everything was exactly the same. But inside my apartment, the boxes kept multiplying, and with them came a strange sense of finality I wasn't used to feeling. I packed in silence. Each item I placed into a box felt heavier than it should have. Books I hadn't opened in years. Clothes tied to moments I barely remembered. Kitchen tools I rarely used. My life looked smaller once it was stacked against the wall. Orderly. Contained. Too contained. I could hear sounds from the neighboring apartment more clearly than before. A chair moving. A window opening. Footsteps that paused, then continued. I wondered if May noticed how often my door opened and closed. I wondered if she heard the tape tearing, the dull thump of boxes touching the floor. At night, I lay on my mattress with the lights off, staring at the ceiling. I thought about the new city, the hospital there, the unfamiliar streets, the anonymity waiting for me. It should have felt exciting. Instead, it felt quiet, empty, even before I had left. The next evening, I came home later than usual. My shift ran long, and I was exhausted. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed May's door was slightly open. Light spilled out onto the floor. I slowed down without realizing it. She didn't step out. She didn't call my name. The door closed softly a moment later. I told myself I was imagining things. Fatigue can distort perception. That's what I believed. The following morning, I took a day off to finish packing. I carried boxes back and forth between my apartment and the car. The building was quiet. Too quiet for a weekday. Each trip down the stairs felt like a small departure. When I returned to the hallway after loading another box, May stood there. She looked like she hadn't slept much. Her hair was tied back carelessly. She asked how much longer I had before I left. I said 2 days. She nodded, asked if I needed help. I said no. Automatically. Instinctively. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She said okay, then added that the building would feel strange without me. The words sounded casual, but there was a hesitation in her voice that caught my attention. I thanked her, said I'd miss the quiet too. That wasn't entirely true. What I would miss, I still couldn't name. She went back inside. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at her closed door, then continued packing. That night, I couldn't focus on anything. I opened my laptop, closed it again. I sat on the floor surrounded by boxes and realized I was postponing the moment when everything would be finished, when there would be nothing left to pack, when leaving would stop being a plan and become a fact. I thought about May more than I wanted to admit, about how little I actually knew her, about how present she had been without ever asking for attention, about how natural it felt to see her door every day, even when we didn't speak. I tried to convince myself that this was just proximity, habit, nothing more. Still, sleep didn't come easily. The next day, the building echoed with sounds again. My sounds. Tape. Cardboard. Drawers closing. I worked steadily, trying not to think. From time to time, I felt a strange awareness, like being observed without being seen. When I stepped into the hallway, I noticed May's door remained closed. Too closed. Too quiet. By the afternoon, my apartment was almost empty. The walls looked unfamiliar without furniture. The echo of my footsteps followed me from room to room. I sat on the floor and checked my phone. No messages. No missed calls. That was normal. I wasn't someone people checked on. And yet, a part of me expected something. A knock. A question. A reason to pause. Nothing came. I stood up and carried the last small box to the car. When I returned, I locked my apartment and leaned against the door for a moment. I felt a pressure in my chest that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. I was leaving the city. I had made that decision months ago. Rationally. Carefully. But standing there in the hallway, with nothing left behind but empty rooms and closed doors, I realized how little I had allowed myself to feel while preparing for it. I didn't know then that the sound of those boxes had already reached further than I imagined. The night before my departure arrived quietly. No dramatic signs. No sudden clarity. Just the slow ticking of time I could no longer ignore. My apartment was almost empty. A mattress on the floor, a bag with essentials, and a chair I hadn't bothered to move yet. Everything else was already in the car. I tried to sleep, but my body refused. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the building breathe. Pipes, distant traffic, an occasional door somewhere below. Every sound felt amplified, as if the place already knew I was leaving. I thought about May again, not in a dramatic way, not with regret. More like a quiet presence that kept returning no matter how often I pushed it aside. I wondered what her evenings looked like. If she noticed the silence next door. If she cared. I told myself it didn't matter. People come and go. Cities change. Lives move forward. Still, I found myself remembering small things. The way she always stepped slightly aside in the hallway to give space. How she listened when someone spoke, really listened, without interrupting. How she smiled with her eyes before her mouth followed. None of it seemed important before. Now it all felt strangely specific. In the early morning, I got up and showered. I dressed simply. Jeans. A clean shirt. Nothing that suggested an ending or a beginning. Just clothes for a drive. I carried the last bag into the hallway. The air smelled faintly of dust and cardboard. My footsteps echoed more than usual. As I locked my door for the final time, I hesitated. I rested my hand on the handle longer than necessary. I wasn't waiting for anything specific. At least that's what I told myself. I went down the stairs and loaded the bag into the car. The city was quiet at that hour. Pale light touched the buildings. It felt like the kind of morning where anything could happen or nothing at all. I sat in the driver's seat but didn't start the engine. Upstairs, behind one of the closed doors, May was awake. She had been awake for most of the night. The sounds from my apartment had stopped hours ago, but the silence was worse. Final. Unavoidable. She sat on her bed, listening for footsteps that didn't come. When she heard my door close for the last time, something inside her finally settled into place. Not calm, not relief, just certainty. She realized she had been building her days around someone who never knew it, waiting for familiar sounds, feeling safe knowing I was nearby, telling herself it meant nothing because it was easier that way. Now that safety was leaving, she stood up, paced the room, sat down again. She told herself it was too late, that people don't run after neighbors, that feelings discovered at the last moment are usually mistakes. But the thought of staying silent felt heavier than the fear of being honest. She dressed quickly, hands shaking more than she expected. No makeup, no planning, just movement driven by something she couldn't ignore anymore. Downstairs, I checked my phone. No messages. I reached for the key, then stopped again. That was when I heard footsteps. Fast, uneven, coming down the stairs. I looked up just as May appeared in the doorway. She stopped when she saw me sitting in the car. For a second, neither of us moved. The moment stretched thin, fragile. She raised her hand slightly, like she wasn't sure whether to wave or ask me to wait. I stepped out of the car. She walked toward me, then stopped a few steps away. Her breathing was unsteady. She looked like someone who had crossed a line she could never step back from. I asked if everything was okay. She nodded too quickly, then shook her head. She said she heard me leave, that she realized something the moment the building went quiet, that she didn't know how to explain it properly. I waited. I didn't interrupt. She told me she never planned to feel this way, that she convinced herself for years that being neighbors was enough, that watching someone from a safe distance was easier than admitting she wanted more. Her voice broke when she said she couldn't pretend anymore. I felt something shift inside me. Not surprise. Recognition. She looked at me and said she understood if it was too late, that she just needed me to know the truth before I disappeared from her life. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city remained quiet around us, unaware of what was unfolding in a small parking lot between two people who had lived side by side without truly meeting. I realized then that my hesitation, my restlessness, my sense of incompleteness had a name. I just hadn't allowed myself to say it out loud. I told her I had kept distance because it felt safer, that I had assumed she saw me as nothing more than a neighbor, that I didn't trust myself to want something I couldn't control. She listened the same way she always did, fully, without rushing me. She took a breath and said the words she had been holding back since the moment she heard the boxes. She asked me not to leave without her. She didn't promise anything. She didn't ask for certainty. She just asked for a chance to try. I looked at my car, at the packed trunk, at the road waiting ahead, and for the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel empty. We stood there in the parking lot longer than either of us expected. The air was cool, the city still half asleep. Nothing dramatic surrounded us. No music, no rain, just two people facing a truth that had taken years to surface. I asked May to sit with me for a moment. Not in the car yet, just on the low concrete edge near the entrance. She hesitated, then nodded. She told me everything she had never said out loud. How she noticed my routines before she noticed her feelings. How she felt comfort in knowing when my lights were on late, because it meant I was home safe after a long shift. How she told herself it was just familiarity, not love, because love felt like something that demanded action. She said the sound of the boxes changed everything, that it forced her to face the reality she had been avoiding, that the idea of me becoming a memory felt unbearable. I listened without interrupting, without trying to fix anything. That was new for me. At the hospital, silence usually meant something was wrong. Here, silence felt necessary. When she finished, she looked down at her hands. She said she didn't expect promises. She said she knew asking me to take her with me was unfair, that she would understand if I chose to leave alone. I told her I needed to be honest too. I said I had learned to live carefully, that being a doctor taught me how fragile plans are, how quickly things change. I said I avoided emotional commitments not because I didn't feel deeply, but because I felt too much and didn't know how to carry it without losing balance. I admitted that when she spoke in the hallway, when she noticed small things, when she simply existed beside me without pressure, it grounded me more than I realized. I said I didn't recognize it as love because it didn't arrive loudly. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and said maybe love isn't supposed to be loud. That sentence stayed with me. I asked her what she imagined if she came with me. She didn't describe a fantasy. She didn't talk about romance or certainty. She said she imagined mornings that weren't lonely. A city that felt less foreign because someone familiar was there. Space to figure things out slowly, together. I told her I couldn't offer perfection. That moving together wouldn't magically solve everything. That I would still have long shifts, difficult days, moments where I retreated into myself. She said she wasn't asking for an easy life. She was asking for a shared one. We sat in silence again. Cars began to pass on the street. The city was waking up. I realized that leaving alone suddenly felt like the riskier option. I asked her one last question. I asked if she was choosing me because she was afraid of being alone, or because she wanted a life with me even if it meant uncertainty. She didn't answer immediately. Then she said she had been alone before, that she knew the difference between fear and choice, that this was a choice. That was enough. I stood up and opened the trunk. I told her there was space, not just in the car, but in my life, if she wanted it. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She smiled in a way that looked like relief more than happiness. We went upstairs together. For the first time, I unlocked my door knowing it wouldn't be my door alone anymore. She packed quickly. Not everything, just essentials. Clothes, her laptop, a few personal items. She stood in her apartment, looking around like she was saying goodbye to a version of herself that no longer fit. Before leaving, she locked her door and placed the key in her bag. She didn't linger. We drove out of the city quietly. No dramatic goodbye. No speeches. Just the road stretching ahead. A few miles in, she reached for the radio, then stopped. Asked if silence was okay. I said it was more than okay. As the city disappeared behind us, I felt something unfamiliar but steady. Not excitement. Not fear. A sense of alignment. We talked later. About practical things. About finding an apartment. About adjusting to a new rhythm. About taking things one step at a time. Nothing felt rushed. Nothing felt forced. I realized that sometimes the biggest changes don't arrive as storms. They arrive as quiet decisions made at the right moment. And I was grateful I didn't start the engine too early. The new city didn't greet us with anything special. No dramatic skyline. No sudden feeling of arrival. Just unfamiliar streets, different traffic sounds, and an apartment we rented temporarily near the hospital. It was small, clean, and empty in the way new places usually are. We carried our bags inside without ceremony. The first days were practical. I started at the hospital almost immediately. New faces, new protocols, long hours again, but this time the exhaustion felt different. When I came home late, the lights were on. May was there, usually working at the table or cooking something simple. We talked about our days without trying to impress each other. There was no illusion that moving together solved everything. We argued once about space, about silence, about how I shut down when I was overwhelmed. But even those moments felt honest. We didn't pretend to be perfect. We learned each other slowly, with patience. One evening, a few weeks after the move, we sat on the floor eating takeout because we still hadn't bought a table. The city noise filtered in through the open window. May leaned back against the wall and said she finally felt like she was living her own life, not watching it from the side. I told her I felt the same. Over time, routines formed. Morning coffee together when my shift allowed it. Quiet walks in the evenings. Shared grocery lists on the fridge. Small things that didn't look impressive from the outside, but held weight from within. Months passed. We found a larger apartment. Not perfect, but ours. We filled it slowly. Furniture chosen together. Photos from weekends we spent exploring nearby towns. A life built deliberately, without rushing. One night, after a particularly hard shift, I came home drained. I sat on the couch in silence. May didn't push me to talk. She sat next to me and rested her head on my shoulder. That simple gesture told me everything I needed to know. I realized then that this wasn't a temporary chapter. This was home. Later that year, we visited our old city together. Just for a day. We walked past the building where we used to live. 2 doors. 1 wall. So much unsaid. May squeezed my hand and smiled softly. She said she was glad we didn't stay neighbors forever. So was I. We didn't need grand declarations to know where we stood. We chose each other every day, in ordinary moments, without drama. I didn't leave the city alone. I didn't lose myself either. I found a life that felt real, steady, and shared. And that was enough.